Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. India today hosted the third Voice of Global South Summit. To talk about the key takeaways, joining me is a special guest in the studio, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, DG RIS for developing countries and also eminent economist. Good evening and welcome, sir, to our studios. Now, your key takeaways of the summit outcome, and also as the countries of the global south articulate a common voice, what kind of a strategic role could a platform like this summit could play in negotiating their demands going forward?
Thank you, Shubhendu. I think it's a very important platform that India has nurtured, the Voice of Global South Summit. This was the third in the series. And if you look at how Prime Minister today evolved the idea in terms of providing a platform to share their respective development experiences, insights, collating evidences, and then eventually when he was closing, he brought in this very unique idea of development compact, where he said that any imbalance in the modalities of engagement among global south countries may create distress, as alarming in case of the debt crisis. So how whether we are transferring technology, whether we are providing market access in trade, or we are even doing the capacity building, providing grants and concessional finance, all the 5 elements that he mentioned, there has to be in harmony. And he said India would dedicate itself to keep this harmony, and hence he proposed the development compact. So the idea, Shubhendu, is developing countries are going through huge distress of liquidity crisis, debt crisis, on top of that food security challenge, health security challenge, energy security challenge. So multiple complexities and challenges in terms of access to development finance.
Right.
So today developing countries shared their perspectives, and as you might have already gathered, there were parallel sessions for health, for finance, for agriculture, for youth, for different dimensions of their engagement. And they have raised several issues which later External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar briefed media about that. So I think it's a very important initiative that has come in.
Right. You mentioned the Global Development Compact that Prime Minister announced, and he talks about a human-centric version in which the debt burden could be eased for developing countries. In that sense, Professor Chaturvedi, what kind of alternative model of multilateralism, economic multilateralism, is Global South articulating here?
Shubhendu, this is very important point. With rise of emerging economies in the global south, like India, like Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, China, we see that there is need for self-discipline in terms of providing support to developing countries. It cannot be always driven by narrow self-interest. And that's what Prime Minister has emphasized, that we have to be empathetic to our partner countries. We have to have the spirit of global south partnership uppermost in our minds. And that's why he said that human-centric development. He did not say resource targeting development framework. So that's where equality, horizontality that the South-South cooperation brings in, that spirit of being demand driven and not thrusting our market requirements through corridor and connectivity projects and ending up with extractive strategies. So that's where Prime Minister today indirectly hinted, suggested, and partner countries have responded to this call of development compact that he has proposed today.
Right, and in view of the remarks that Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered, how do you also read the characteristics of India's leadership in the Global South region? Prime Minister talks about the G20, where the attention of the developed world was steered towards the needs of the Global South. And then he also speaks about as India as the first responder to crisis from Gaza to Papua New Guinea.
Absolutely right, Shubhendu. And if you see Prime Minister's global leadership, there are 3 characteristics that Prime Minister Modi has always exhibited. One certainly is to come up with new ideas and new institutional frameworks to take the task forward. During the G20 presidency and after its closing the second Voice of Global South Summit, he announced setting up of Dakshin, the Global South Center of Excellence. This is to share India's own development experience. So the first characteristic of any Global South leader should be in terms of new ideas, new suggestions, new pathways for development. So that's one. The second is restraint, and Prime Minister Modi has shown huge restraint in terms of demands by India during the COVID crisis. So the Vishwamitra image that we wanted to project. So COVID, our people needed vaccines, but the global community also needed vaccine, and India ensured that, delivered it, even during the war times in many parts of the world. India has shared food grains despite of the fact that domestic prices have gone up. So we have restrained our demand. And third characteristic, which I think is extremely important, is to avoid any kind of polarization. So Prime Minister Modi at one end is saying Global South partnership, but on the other he is saying that this is not anti-West. It is to take West along with the Global South. And that's where he is talking about triangular cooperation. So this, I think, is a perfect balancing that the Global South require. Nobody needs polarization at this point. They need resources for development, they want a fair world, and they want their own national space for decision making. And PM Modi, by giving all these three, has naturally assumed that leadership role in the Global South.
Right, and the kind of egalitarian space that Prime Minister Modi asked Global South to imagine, India could make very important interventions in that area. There's digital public infrastructure and more.
Absolutely. Dr. Jaishankar today explained at length in terms of how digital public infrastructure, how our idea of vaccines and idea of one health, one world, the idea of bringing in accelerated approach on sustainable development goals, also trying to bring in solar energy like our own experience of rooftop solar panels that we are planning to provide, the idea of water, biodiversity and natural resource conservation strategies that are needed, but also at the same time providing necessary policy lessons from India's own development experience. So how those insights are to be collated and shared with the Global South.
Right, and also I think a congregation of nations of the Global South provides an important platform for a critique of the global order as well. And I think something that stood out in Dr. Jaishankar's press conference was the idea of shifting goalposts that the leaders talked about. And in the domain of climate change, that no country, especially the countries of the Global South, remain untouched. What could be the road ahead with these ideas being discussed by these countries?
One point, Shubhendu, that came up was in terms of encouraging North to respect their commitments. If you recall, 1970, we decided that 0.7% of GNP should be contributed as part of ODA. Not many developed countries have respected, and this even now has not been achieved. Some have already permanently deferred it. Then they promised $100 billion for climate change funds. That has also disappeared. So encouraging North to respect their commitment is one. But second is enabling Global South countries to evolve their own indigenous development strategies. India has demonstrated that in last 7 budgets. Finance Minister herself has been pushing in enhanced budgetary allocations for capital expenditure. So India's focus on capital expenditure on infrastructure is showing the way for the Global South to take it forward.
Right. And so finally, how do you interpret Prime Minister Narendra Modi's passionate call for unity among the countries of Global South, particularly in the context of their ability to possibly negotiate together in multilateral forums and reforms of multilateral forums like the UN?
This is one very serious issue, and I think Prime Minister, during his 2 addresses that he had, a closing and opening, if you combine the 2, you get 2 or 3 messages very clearly. First and foremost is the onslaught of social media and technology for disturbing democratically elected governments, for attacking institutions which are trying to work in terms of a reconstruction of several countries. So the national government's efforts are thwarted by these efforts. So one call that PM has given is to bring in greater understanding on AI and AI governance, also trying to bring in formats in which Global South can collectively raise voice. He gave some examples like on climate change, like on Future Summit, what kind of collated efforts we can make to bring Global South's issues at the center stage. The second part is the development derailment that has happened post-COVID, and there his idea was that how we enhance development finance,
Yes.
the cost of accessing it should be reduced, quantum should be expanded, and we bring back our economies for sustainable development and the goals that we accepted.
Right. On that note, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, thank you very much for joining
Thank
us
you.
on the News Hour,
Okay.
sharing your perspective.